In the vast land and waters of the earth lies one of its basic structure, the community. The community is where the relationship between the different species of plants, animals, and humans starts. From a simple structure of ants living their own little colony, where each organism has its own function, from the egg-laying queen to the food-collecting workers, forming a population. As we view this structure in a larger perspective, the community arises. This is where survival comes into place, where each and every living organism strives to live out its own generation. These organisms fight not only with each other for food sources and mating, but also fight with the changing temperature, rainfall, acidity, drought, and other environmental factors that may drastically transform their lives out of their environmental tolerance. These changes are apparent for both the terrestrial and aquatic environments. From the forest with towering trees to the grassland, savanna, shrublands, the freezing tundra and the dry desert, to the dark depths of the oceans, to the rivers, the flowing streams, ponds, and lakes. Myriad species of plants and animals live together in each of these environmental niches. A wide variety of physiological, morphological, and behavioral adaptations lead to a species' environmental tolerance. But beyond this limit, a species may slowly go to extinction. Going back to the small structure of a community, it all starts in the fundamental niche, which is the environmental niche where a species lives on its own. In this niche, the factors affecting the survival of a species are found. It is where the living constraints of an organism are slowly discovered one by one. As environmental conditions change from one place to another, the possible distribution and abundance of species changes. Therefore, this leads to change in the community structure. Other than the environment, one of the greatest factors in influencing this structure or community is the presence of relationships, of predators and competitors restricting the community and even regulating their population, or of mutualists providing greater survival for the two organisms. Together with the changes in the environment, changes called zonation become apparent. The rocky shorelines, consisting of the 3/4 of the world's shoreline, found in the pristine beaches of the Pacific, is composed of the intertidal zone, exposed to both the high and the low tides. This is one of the harshest marine environments. Not only are the tides changing day in and day out, the temperature fluctuations bring a big gap in the survival of organisms, sometimes even leading to desiccation. Organisms that can tolerate this changing environment can thrive in the upper intertidal zone, while those who cannot live in the lower intertidal zone, where it is under less environmental stress, living under. The differences in the environmental tolerance between these organisms allow them to coexist in the intertidal zone, leading each organism to thrive in the same space in different zones. This is not only true to animals, but also to plants, which are sensitive to the availability of light, water, and nutrients. Their adaptation to the changes in these needs determine their ability to grow, reproduce, and survive, whether it may be in an environment with a high or low resource available. In the forest of the Amazon is a thick canopy from the high-rising trees with their big buttresses, getting most of the sunlight and other resources available, leaving the small shrubs and grasses within a limited light source only. Were these small plants under the canopy able to survive? Yes. Despite this, each and every plant living under those thick canopies was able to live, surviving each day at a time. Species that have the highest growth rate acquire most of the resources, thus leaving only little to the slow-growing ones.
Environmental heterogeneity influences community diversity. The species present in a community reflects the direct response, may it be survival, growth, or reproduction, to the common abiotic environmental conditions, as well as their interactions, either direct or indirect, to one another. This means that as the environmental conditions change from a location to another, so will the set of species that can adapt and interact to that area change, which is the framework of biological structure. However, environmental conditions are not homogeneous most of the time, even within a given community. Based on a study of Philip Robertson and his fellow colleagues, they quantified spatial variation in soil nitrogen and moisture on an abandoned field composed of forb, grass, and different shrub species in southeastern Michigan. Detailed sampling within the field revealed considerable spatial variation in soil moisture and nitrate. But how does the heterogeneity in an area within a community influence patterns of diversity? Does heterogeneity in environmental conditions reflects to the area's ability to support more species? Heterogeneity in the light environment of forest floor caused by death of canopy trees has been shown to increase tree species. The increase in available light below canopy gaps allows for survival and growth of shade-intolerant species or will otherwise die from the community. Caroline Augsburger of the University of Illinois conducted an experiment to examine the influence of light availability on growth and seedling survival for a shade-tolerant and shade-intolerant tree. The results for two contrasting species present that the shade-tolerant species, Myroxylon balsamum, showed little difference in survival and growth rates under sunlight and shade conditions. While for shade-intolerant species, Ceiba pentandra showed a big reduced indifference on survival and growth rates under unshaded than shaded. By week 20, all the species have died. A good example for the influence of environmental heterogeneity comes from the relationship between vegetation structure and bird species diversity. The features of vegetation are related to the species-specific needs, including food, cover, and nesting sites that influence habitat suitability for a given bird species. Since these needs vary among bird species, vegetation has an influence on the bird diversity within the community. Grasslands support 6 or 7 species of birds, while deciduous forests in eastern North America may support 30 or more species. The late Robert MacArthur of Princeton University was the first ecologist to quantify the relationship between structural heterogeneity of vegetation and diversity of animal species that depend on the vegetation as habitat. He measured bird species diversity and structural heterogeneity of vegetation in different communities in northeastern United States. Communities represented a variety of structures from grassland to deciduous forest. He developed index of foliage height diversity to quantify structural heterogeneity of the vegetation. He found out that there is a strong relationship between bird species diversity and index of foliage height diversity for different communities. Increase in the diversity of potential habitats within a community results in an increase in the number of animal species that can be supported. An increase in the diversity of food resources within a community can potentially increase diversity of consumers that depend on that specific food resources. Ecologist Catherine Reed of University of Minnesota quantified patterns of species diversity for both flowering plants and their insect pollinators in 8 prairie grassland and communities in South Minnesota. She found significant positive correlation between bee species and Forbes species richness. This appears to be based on 2 factors, namely, a great number of food resource for bee species and more consistent food resource throughout this season for bee species. Resource availability can influence plant diversity within a community. In general, increased availability of nutrients can support higher rates of photosynthesis, growth, and higher density of plant per unit area. Michael Houston, an ecologist at Texas State University, examined relationship between availability of soil nutrient and species richness at different tropical rainforest sites in Costa Rica. He found an inverse relationship between species richness and composite index of soil infertility, meaning great number of tree species support lower nutrient available soil in tropical rainforest communities. He hypothesized that this results from reduced competitive displacement under low nutrient availability.
The usual conception of food webs is that one organism feeds on another organism, which will feed on a third organism. This may go on until the final consumer on top of the pyramidal hierarchy, but that is not always the case. Food webs could get quite complex due to indirect interactions of species within a community. This renders the effect of two species affecting one another without even having to interact with each other. One example of this is how lynx do not directly interact with white spruce. However, by reducing snowshoe hare and other herbivore populations that feed on white spruce, lynx's predation can positively affect the white spruce population. Another example that shows an indirect interaction with the community is shown in an experiment conducted by Robert Payne, wherein he manipulated the species present at an intertidal zone along the rocky coastline of the Pacific Northwest by removing the starfish which preys on mussels, barnacles, limpets, and chitons, which inhabit the said coastline. This caused a decrease in the diversity of the species found in the place due to increased competition. This is called keystone predation, in which the predator enhances one or more less competitive species by reducing the abundance of the more competitive species. First, we divide the types of indirect effects into consumptive and non-consumptive. For consumptive indirect effects, these occur when predators cause a change in the density of a transmitter species, which in turn has an effect on the receiver. This is also called density-mediated indirect interactions. In 1930, cougars who would prey on mule deer were largely eliminated from U. Smith National Park. This caused the mule deer population to grow, resulting in herbivory on black oak to intensify. There are other different types of indirect interactions. In letter A, for exploitative competition, two consumers sharing a common prey may compete indirectly via classical exploitation, competition, or resource depression. In an apparent competition, two prey species may only appear to compete because if either increases, a shared predator also increases, which operates to the detriment of the other prey population. An example of this is in letter C, competitive mutualism. Populations of three species at the same trophic level, arranged so that one species is sandwiched between the others. Populations P1 and P3 are indirect mutualists because each inhibits the other's competitor. A more complex four-species system that results in an indirect mutualism or facilitation can be seen in letter D. In this case, populations C1 and C2, which do not interact directly but consume different prey species, interact indirectly because their prey compete. If consumer 2 increases, its prey decreases, which in turn reduces competition with P1, providing more food for consumer species 1. Lastly, in letter E, a trophic cascade with populations of three species at three trophic levels. The plant 1 and the carnivore 1 are indirect mutualists because they share an herbivore. Non-consumptive indirect effects occur when predators cause a change in a trait of the transmitter species, which in turn has an effect on the receiver. This is also called trait-mediated indirect interactions. Take for example the loss of tiger sharks from a shark bay ecosystem. This could shift dugong herbivory away from meadow edges and alter patterns of seagrass biomass and species composition. Ultimately, larger dugong population would likely overgraze seagrass.
A community. It has a large diversity of species living in it. Among these species, competition and environmental stress is present. Thus, the species sort spatial changes in the community, meaning a type of species will dominate or live in a specific space or location. These spatial changes within the community is called zonation. Due to physical and biological stress, the species would look for or dominate a suitable place to grow, and if they have the capability to push back other species colonizing the area, then it is possible that they would thrive in that specific location, and the pushed back species would have to do what is left for them. Now we know that zonation happens when species will only colonize or dominate on the area that they can afford to live and grow, and will not move into the other areas that provides more stress to them. Thus, distribution of the species within a certain location could be observed. The diversity of a community is often most high, and numerous species found there are intertwined together as predators and prey. It also could be secondary and tertiary consumers competing for resources. In Africa, predation is very evident, and every day is a fight for survival. Now we know that zonation happens when species will only colonize or dominate on the area that they can afford to live and grow, and will not move into the other areas that provides more stress to them. Thus, distribution of the species within a certain location could be observed. In the community, every day is a competition. It is to hunt or to be hunted. Nevertheless, it is a vicious cycle of survival within the wild food web. But what if we pull out one species from the community? Will it affect the competition in the food web? According to Norma Fowler, an ecologist of Texas University, removing one species would give little to no effect in the competition and abundance in the community. But removing groups of species would have a greater effect in the competition and in the diffuse of interaction within the food web, thus giving a positive result in the survival of the focal species.